I'm here with Matt Harris, the screenwriter of The Starling, which premieres this Friday on Netflix. Matt, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, the film stars Melissa McCarthy and Chris O'Dowd as Lily and Jack, a married couple who are experiencing the after effects of one of the most horrible things that can happen to a parent.
Right.
Jack is institutionalized, leaving Lily to seek advice from an unconventional counselor played by Kevin Kline. And amidst all of this, there's a very pesky bird that is terrorizing the family garden.
Yes.
So tell me about the inspiration for the story and
Yeah.
how you gained insight into this very specific look at the problems that some parents can face.
Yeah. I think it kind of started from the macro and went to the micro in a way. And I say that, what I mean is I was always sort of, plagued by this dilemma of like, why is it bad things happen to good people? What is it in the universe that seems so chaotic despite our best efforts to give reason and rationale to everything that happens? There's some things that happen where it's just so inexplicable and so inexplicably horrible that we take these things very personally. And so I was looking for a way to kind of write a story about that, because I think through storytelling, obviously, we do try to make sense of things. And so it kind of became a story about trying to make sense of things, and I wanted to keep it small. And I kind of landed on a character that maybe is reasonably invisible in our daily lives. So it could be a person we could all relate to, not even a grocery store manager, an assistant grocery store manager in a small town where they didn't even have a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Excuse me. And so that's how it started. It's just started piecing those things together, and I wanted the bird to kind of come to represent that indifference a little bit, but also, how do you confront it? It's kind of a strange antagonist in the film, if you will, so rather than defeating the antagonist, she has to come to a sort of a peace with it and acceptance of it. And so that's sort of what the story evolved from, and I wanted to deal with some heavy stuff, but I didn't want it to be so heavy that it just turned you off 2 minutes in. So that's why we added a little bit of the comedy to it, if you will. Trojan horsed it,
Right. So, I mean, you're dealing with sort of one of the major themes that we as human beings struggle with every day, and you're trying to put it into a film, and I think to great success. I mean, no one's going to have all of the answers because we're mortal, but
Right.
while working this out on the page and then through the whole process of the movie coming together, did you find that you found some of the answers? Did you find comfort through your characters, or did it just kind of lead to other bigger questions that you might have to deal with later on?
You know what? A little bit of both, but I'm glad you brought it up because, one of the things I did discover, in writing this, that there are no big solvable moments to express on a film. Like there was never going to be there's an old film Officer and a Gentleman where Richard Gere goes into this factory at the end of the film and sweeps his love off her feet and leads her out. That was never going to happen. Lily was never going to walk into the psychiatric hospital, pick Jack up, and love lifts us up where we belong. That's one telling of it, but that's not very true and that's not very real. And so I feel like, I did answer some questions, and in the sense of what does it mean to get beyond something, and I just kind of wanted to crack that door and shine a little bit of hope, and that's the door you have to walk through. You have to at least be willing, right? And I think for his character, he had to be willing to talk and willing to open that door and to really start making progress. And, I had the opportunity when I was going to college. I had a pretty good job, and I was working nights part-time at a psychiatric hospital. And it afforded me a lot of time to work on homework and that sort of thing. But I also was around quite a bit. And, you come to realize that in that field, that one of the, I think, most frustrating things for people who work in that field is that progress can be very difficult to measure. It's not like picking up a chart and seeing that their vital signs are normal and they're stable. And, this person can go to home next week. It's a lot more mushy than that. Hard to put your finger on. And so
Yeah, and to that,
I felt being around that, I kind of wanted to deal with that, and I do think it's a relevant topic to be talking about today, even though this film was written, 15 years ago or whatever. So.
yeah, there is definitely an undercurrent of the faces that we all have to put on just to survive, especially with dealing with people who are all going through their own trauma, whether it's everyday stuff or the more profound kind of
Yeah.
the unfair lightning bolts that get hurled at people.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you about the development of the script in a couple of different ways. One, this wound up on the famous Blacklist a
Right.
few years ago. So that's a pretty buzzworthy honor. What did getting on the blacklist mean in terms of, okay, you've got a script that's circulating around Hollywood and now there's interest in it. It's getting tracked and shopped around like in earnest with studios and stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a bit of a life changer at the time, right? When you start getting that kind of attention, and I was working with an agent at CAA at the time, big agency, so they have this powerful forces behind it, and it's getting into everybody's hands. And so it's kind of a cloud nine experience on a personal level. I'll be honest with you, you're like, this is it. I've been accepted. Because I mean, as writers, we're always looking for validation, right? Because we're constantly plagued by this imposter syndrome and, wretched, insecurity that plagues us constantly. So this was some validation. It felt great, but you begin to realize it's still very far from becoming a real film, and it takes so much. I'm sure other subject matter, gets to the screen a lot faster, right? But when you're dealing with like a little quirky dramedy, low budget, it's hard for people to find the right box for that. And, I'm really grateful for streaming, I'll tell you that much, because I think it's a wonderful outlet for independent films. I've really noticed it for documentary film, which I've always enjoyed for years and years, but I don't think, unless you were living somewhere that actually put documentary features out, you had to hopefully comb through your local video store back in the day and hope that they carried some of these documentaries that you may not even have heard of, but now they're front and center on places like Netflix, right? They're constantly releasing nonfiction.
Right. And you bring up something I hadn't really thought about until just now. It's not only documentaries, it's documentary series, things that go on for multiple seasons, investigative, things that get multiple episodes, like 8 hours or something instead of an hour and a half, the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really incredible what they're allowing them filmmakers to do. It's a wonderful time. It really is.
The second question I had about the screenplay was, I read in the some press notes that Ted Melfi, he loved the script, but he had one request, and that was to gender swap the lead. So Jack and Lily apparently had the different roles in terms of who was in that institution. And his concern was that the husband holding things down while the wife had a nervous breakdown would be a bit of a cliche. I think it worked out for the best because McCarthy and O'Dowd are wonderful in the film with the material. But did you have any reservations about that change? And did you feel that his note was dismissive of your original vision in any way?
It's a great question. Actually, the credit goes to, and taking nothing away from Ted, of course, but it was the producer, Dylan Sellers, who had that original idea at the time when we were still discussing the film and trying to get it to talent, right? And Melissa already signed on to do it as her character in the way it was before we did the swap, and she was interested in, but she's such a big name. It's like, how do we make it bigger? And there was some reservations I had when that conversation was happening. I was like, wait a minute, am I going to be doing a rewrite to try and spend more time with her in the hospital versus, him in the outside world? What are we doing? But he said, what if you switched them? And Ted and I were both like intrigued by the idea, weren't sure how that would go. So Ted's like, just find, replace, swap, on your computer. Let's just read it and then we can come to a decision. And, for me, I'll be honest with you, it just absolutely breathed new life into it. I don't think And I think some of the things that Ted said are valid, but I don't think they were precognitive of it. I think it came about as a result of reading it in comparison. So, I think for all of us, it was transformative. We loved the idea. Melissa was very grateful that we did it. And, it was the best version. And so, in one sense, it's great that it took as long as it took, because I don't think we would have done this version before.
It's funny you mentioned find and replace. That was literally the wording on my next question, which is, okay, once you decided to make that change, was it difficult kind of getting back into the characters' heads and imagining them in a different spot? Did you have friends or colleagues that you kind of reached out to make sure that you're telling the story honestly?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you try to do as a male writer, you're trying to write a female character. You want to be careful that you're giving it a fully rounded character, right? So I think here, I'd just be fully honest with you, when I made those changes and I looked at what was becoming Jack's character, I found it to be a little flat and one-dimensional, lacking depth, lacking understanding of some of the emotion. And that I think was a consequence of not writing a fully realized female character. So I thought it was a good lesson for me, right? To be able to switch those genres. It kind of taught me a lesson about, how maybe I need to work a little bit harder at writing the opposite gender. But yeah, it was definitely there was more to it than just find replace. Yeah. But I like just what happened to it when she was an art teacher and then he was an art teacher. It's just kind of like, I feel like I'm seeing a character that maybe I haven't seen before, versus one I have seen before. And that's what was more interesting to me than anything else that came out of that swap. I knew Melissa McCarthy was going to carry it, right? And I think that maybe making her character, making her female, gave it even a little bit more importance in terms of the sort of beleaguered state that she was in, and I feel like too often maybe women just get more and more heaped on them because we just operate on this assumption that they can handle it, and so it was interesting to watch her carry the burden of what she was carrying in this role.
Yeah. Now, I do a regular series on this podcast called Page to Screen, where I look at a novel that's been adapted into a film with a friend of mine. Now, The Starling wasn't written as a book, but it was written as a screenplay. So I wonder, having watched the finished film, I don't know if you've seen it multiple times or just once or whatever, but how does that compare to the movie you were kind of writing and editing and directing in your head as you were pounding out the screenplay all those years ago?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, it's different. Right? It's different. And it's not a criticism. It's simply because what was great is that they shot the script, right? They shot the whole script. I was even surprised by some of the little features of the screenplay that they were shooting when I was out there watching. However, it was almost 3 hours long. It turns out, there was only like 112 pages. I think my final delivery was. But the screenplay just, the film, the first cut was really long. It's like 2 hours and 45 minutes or something crazy. And so they had to get it down. I think it's an hour 42 right now.
Yeah.
And so they had to cut an hour out. So now you're taking what you had, right? This sort of vision of this film in your head. And they had to really make some severe cuts and cut out whole storylines, a couple characters, Jimmy O. Yang. He's a very funny comedian, actor. He played Bernard on Crazy Rich Asians, the film. He was in it, had a couple scenes in it, and he was good. Daveed Diggs had a bigger role. Timothy Oliphant, big time. Just went away.
So when these trims are happening, do you, as the screenwriter, are you consulted by the director and the editor, or there's like,
No.
we're going to go do this and hopefully you like what we have for you?
Yeah, no, it was pretty much hoping you like what we have for you. Yeah, I'll tell you something. There's there's a lesson to be had for screenwriters. I mean, it's that unless you're directing something that you wrote, once you turn it over, once they buy that screenplay from you, once you sign those contracts and you read those contracts, and you are, forfeiting for profit all rights and claims to the characters, to the story, to everything, any sort of, So it's theirs, and then you go out on set and you're so excited and it's great, trust me. But you quickly realize this isn't mine anymore. It's theirs. And that's okay. It's like, but it's theirs. Hey, Matt, how you doing? It's good to see you. But we're, nobody's consulting me really. You know what I mean? Maybe some of the actors talk to you a little bit about the character, which is great. But mainly, it becomes a director's world at that point. It really does.
I really enjoyed the movie, and I'm not ashamed to say that. I was wiping tears away after more than a couple of scenes. But a number of my colleagues, however, seem to take great glee in snarking up their negative reviews.
Yeah.
And I find it embarrassing, frankly. I wonder, have you read any of those critiques, and how would you counter them if you even cared to?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I did. I read, okay, so this is the first time I've had to experience, right? Critics, and with all the glee and the joy and the anticipation of the movie coming out, I knew it was going to open at Toronto. And I remember thinking one day, I was like, whoa, I'm going to have to read criticism of this thing. What if some don't like it, And I was not expecting sort of some of the vituperation that you read, it's just like, whoa, it's pretty staggering. So I read about 2, maybe 3, and I stopped. I really did. It was just a little too much. There was one piece I read that I felt like, gosh, I think they even called out Melissa's age. And, it was, I don't know if this film had a target on its back because it came in with all this talent, and it had already been pre-sold to Netflix for $20 million sight unseen. They'd seen a trailer and a script, and they bought it. And I'm not sure, I'm not taking anything away from any of the criticism. Everybody's entitled, obviously, to their opinion. But I don't think I would say anything to anybody, except I don't see any point in getting personal about like Melissa McCarthy's age or anything like that. I feel like you're kind of getting off the rails in the criticism a bit. But, I'm glad you liked it. I thought, I've talked to some others, people whose opinions I value, who've liked it, So I'm hopeful that I really do feel like once it gets on Netflix, they have a way of finding an audience, on Netflix. And those are the people I'm really most anxious to please, I really am. It would be a thrill to see it doing well on Netflix.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you were able to keep that perspective, because I was reading some of these and I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
But I understand that your next film is very different. It's a Western that's directed by Walter Hill and starring Rachel Brosnahan. So what can you tell me about that?
Yeah, it's Dead for a Dollar. And it started out as a film called Moon of Popping Trees. Again, a film that underwent a major overhaul a little bit in setting. It's a Western. It's much more of a sort of hard-boiled story. I think people who are fans of Western and action are really going to fall in love with Walter Hill. Maybe fans who had never discovered some of his work like I had, like The Long Riders, terrific action film. And I'm really excited to see what they do with it. It's Rachel Brosnahan, and it's also Willem Dafoe and Christoph Waltz. So I think there's some fun characters in there.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to checking that out, and congratulations on the Starling, and thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me about it.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
All right, take care, man.
You too.
All right, bye.